Hello, I'm Rachael Babin from the Oncology Network. Welcome to the Oncology Podcast's Experts on Point series. How do we tackle inequities in cancer care? What role do collaborative networks play in ensuring better outcomes for patients and their families? And how can molecular tumour boards bridge the gap for those outside metropolitan areas, giving them access to life-saving treatments and clinical trials? To explore these critical questions, I'm joined by Professor Mark Shackleton, Director of Oncology at Alfred Health, Professor of Oncology at Monash University, Chair of Melanoma and Skin Cancer Trials Limited, and Co-Director of the Monash Partners Comprehensive Cancer Consortium. So let's dive into the groundbreaking work being done to break down barriers and expand access to precision oncology. Hi Mark, welcome to the Oncology Podcast.
Thank you so much, Rachael. It's great to be here with you.
We are here today to talk about the work of the Monash Partners Comprehensive Cancer Consortium, or as it's known, the MPCCC. However, as you've not been on the podcast before, I'd like to start with a personal question so we can get to know you better. Why did you decide to become an oncologist?
Yeah, great question. There's actually a funny family story here. Apparently, when I was very young, I was helping my grandmother, and she said to me, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And apparently I said, "Granny, I'm going to cure cancer." It was apparently when I was very, very small. I don't even know how I would have even known about that sort of thing. I didn't really think much about that as far as I'm aware for a long time thereafter. I just went to med school. I didn't have probably too many clear ideas about what I wanted to do in those early years. Towards the end of medical school, I was rotated to the hematology and oncology ward of the hospital that I was training at. I somewhat belatedly had this exposure to cancer medicine on the oncology ward, and I was literally within a week or two, I thought, oh my goodness, this is what I was meant to do. I just really enjoyed the dynamism, the complexity, the multifaceted issues that we deal with every day and that patients face all the time. Physical issues, psychological issues, emotional issues, spiritual issues. I mean, it's a very diverse and interesting specialty. And it's also, from a medical point of view, quite general. I mean, there are very few systems in the body that are not affected either by cancer directly or by the consequences of its treatments. I think they were the main reasons why I just really fell for it, and I was hooked. Shortly after that, I was basically applying to get into formal oncology training, and I never looked back.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we better get stuck into the groundbreaking work that you're doing with the MPCCC. So just for the broader audience, could you start by giving us an overview? So what is the MPCCC's mission and why was it created?
Yeah, so really the MPCCC was created, really in response to the laudable but still very centralised investment that went in from the state government in Victoria around the development of the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, which is an amazing institution, has done and it has done and continues to do amazing work. But the truth is that there was a lot of investment around that hospital and the network that was created around it, that unfortunately, although lots of people from around the state and Melbourne do go to Peter Mac to get their treatment, the vast majority actually don't. And there was a sense, certainly around the Monash University affiliated hospitals and community, that those investments were not really trickling down to benefit the patients being looked after in those hospitals, and certainly the staff that were looking after them. In response, the Monash University sort of took the lead in seeking to address that by creating the MPCCC, which functions as a network that links all of the Monash Uni affiliate hospitals, as well as the research institutes and the university itself, of course, in order to facilitate essentially cutting-edge cancer diagnostics and cancer care and access thereto for the patients living in the regions that are served by those hospitals. And it does this in several ways. So one of the main focuses has been in improving access to what we now call precision oncology, so approaches to cancer care that rely on modern diagnostics, particularly molecular diagnostics, and essentially creating a networked approach to giving patients, and particularly the carers looking after them, doctors and nurses and the like, much easier and improved access to that type of approach to cancer care. And it's actually been a tremendous success. The hospitals really crying out for this sort of administrative support and ways to bring the hospitals together so they could collectively have a bigger impact and I guess a bigger say in the way funding was being distributed from the state government towards improving these types of services. It's really been a very successful venture with large numbers of patients, easily over 1,000 patients now having access to such diagnostics and also being linked to the sorts of treatments that are made available as a consequence of this type of testing. So really it was basically in response to what was at the time considered to be an inequitable distribution of resources, basically. And I don't think that was the deliberate ploy, of course, of the people that were responsible at the time, but that was the sort of net effect. And I think that's sort of now panned out in the way that sort of feeling which was real and being experienced by people certainly in the Monash Uni affiliated hospitals, I think has now panned out and indeed been recognised in both the Australian and Victorian cancer plans as really a key goal of improving the way that cancer care is delivered over the next 5 to 10 years. So breaking down silos, creating networks that result in the decentralisation of expertise, or at least making that expertise readily available across wide networks to enable patients to get access to new technologies as close to home as possible. And so that's kind of what MPCCC's really sought to do from its inception. And we feel that vision has really been validated by the latest cancer plans.
That's incredible. We will get into more of the details around equity and the success stories of the model. But just to go back to this collaborative model, how does the MPCCC collaborative model differ from traditional cancer centre structures?
Traditional cancer centre structures usually revolve around an individual physical entity, often called cancer centre. And although that centre might develop its own networks into other smaller hospitals or smaller oncology departments or treatment centres, there's not necessarily a requirement for that. I mean, ultimately, the centres exist as independent entities that are, the concept is fantastic, and it's been, that these centres across the world have been, proven to be often sources of great leadership and innovation in cancer care. The problem is that the investment in them is often substantial, and I think the way that they've typically evolved, and this is, I think, the truth across the world, and certainly has been the case in Victoria, is that the benefits that arise from those investments don't necessarily trickle down to all, or even a large, or even a decent proportion of the taxpayers that fundamentally pay for those investments. So I think that the next evolution of cancer centres really needs to think more carefully about the way that they are networked across the wider healthcare delivery community to ensure critical access. And so MPCCC has really been designed specifically to address that issue. So it is actually a network. So rather than being a central physical centre, it's essentially an administrative team that supports a network. So it provides fora and facilities to individual members of the network to come together and exchange information as rapidly as possible to support the sort of point of care delivery of whatever the innovation is. As I've mentioned, in our cases, we've focused particularly on application of precision oncology, but to deliver that approach as close to where patients are coming in for treatment as possible, which is usually close to their home.
Yeah, it's so important, as we know.
So the main difference is a difference between a physical centre and a network.
Excellent. And can I ask you to share some details about the fellowship program that you have running?
Of course. Yeah, we're really excited about the fellowship program. It was kind of just an idea, actually, that we had 5 or 6 years ago, having already created a network that was really dominantly supported by senior staff who, look, in truth, although they were all committed to it and enthusiastic participants, in truth had pretty limited time and often other commitments such that they couldn't probably participate in the network as much as would be ideal. I mean, it's still successful, but we felt like it wasn't achieving all that it could. So I can't remember who actually came up with the idea, but someone said, why don't we actually invest in early career oncologists who, aren't so multiply committed, are at a career stage where they, need to be focused and engaged in really sort of innovative new areas to help them sort of build their CVs and their skills and expertise. And as I said, our focus was on essentially molecular diagnostics and linking those diagnostics with innovative therapies in clinical trials. And that's really the kind of sweet spot of the classical oncology fellow jobs, or at least many of them that are out there. So they would be an ideal group of workers who would most meaningfully contribute to the specific project that we had in mind, which was the Precision Oncology Project. It's like the fellows needed this project for their own careers, but the project also needed the fellows because it needed to be working with early career doctors who could give more of their time and energy to it. So that was the kind of concept. The actual practical application of it was for the MPCCC, which by that stage had attracted more substantial government investment and also, importantly, co-contributions from the partner hospitals. I mean, this is an entity that's not just government-backed, but it's actually got the support from the individual hospitals that are part of the network, obviously realising its value. The strategy with the Fellows program was to take that money into MPCCC and to basically reinvest it directly into the key partner hospitals by specifically funding fellow positions, so early career clinical oncologist positions, embedded within each of the oncology units at the 5 major partners. And then to provide those fellows with essentially administrative support to help them talk to each other a lot and all the time. That's in essence what actually happens. And look, I couldn't have been more impressed or even really prouder of the fellows. I mean, even the very first ones that just created this fellows network from nothing. I mean, they were amazing. They, clearly very hungry for this sort of opportunity and also to be able to acquire the sort of knowledge that is about modern molecular diagnostics that they fully realized that they needed to be more familiar with because it's, clear that the oncology field has evolved substantially in the direction where a much more in-depth appreciation of the cancer genomics and how molecular changes in cancer result in growth and progression of the disease in a manner that can sometimes be therapeutically targetable. So I remember they said to me they felt at the beginning very ill-prepared for the modern era of cancer treatment as a consequence of their training through the College of Physicians. And so they saw this as a great opportunity to be able to be paid to upskill themselves as well as obviously contribute to the management of individual patients, but then to do it in this sort of closely mentored but also very supportive environment where they were kind of learning from each other as they developed their own sort of meeting and interaction schedule. So it's been wonderful to see them, and so the feedback we've had has been overwhelmingly positive. In fact, the ones who have left us to go on to other things have, actually been quite sad that they've had to leave us because they felt like that they were getting so much benefit from them, even just personally to prepare for their own careers, let alone the contributions that they made across the wider network. So it's a very exciting part of the program, and we're looking forward to getting that refunded.
It seems to me always that collaboration is a word we discuss in quite a soft sense sometimes. So it feels like an add-on or perhaps something that involves long meetings that are very earnest but don't necessarily deliver practice-changing results. As you say, particularly in a specialism that's developing so rapidly in terms of emerging technologies, targeted treatments. But collaboration is clearly embedded into the core of the MPCCC. And so this is an opportunity to talk about concrete evidence of how this network approach leads to better outcomes. So I'm hoping that now you can share some of these success stories about this collaborative work. For example, how has the MPCCC improved access to things that really matter to patients and their families, like access to life-saving treatments?
It's a great question, and it's really important to focus on hard outcomes. And certainly that's what we are required to report on to our funders, both the hospital executives and government partners. So the one we're really focused on in terms of metrics that benefit patients has been the Precision Cancer Program. To describe how that's currently working, which I think is important to inform regarding the metrics. So at the moment, we have a very substantial mailing list. In fact, the program's open to every clinician in Victoria, actually. So we don't actually restrict access to the program to Monash University affiliate hospitals. In fact, we get a lot of specialists dialing in from outside of our sort of core network, which is fantastic. The process is that clinicians looking after cancer patients refer their patients in to the MPCCC Precision Oncology program via a number of mechanisms. There's a direct sort of contact, a process and email whereby molecular sequencing results that the patient might have from testing that might have already been done anywhere actually are sent in, and then the responsibility for interpreting those results is given to the fellows network as well as the supervisors and other scientists who are involved in that process. The other mechanism of referral into the program is through Omico groups in Sydney. We do get many referrals of cases from their treating clinicians that refer their cases to the Omico sequencing program, which is called CASP, and then basically include in that referral allusion to the fact that they're an MPCCC partner clinician or working for a partner organisation. And that then triggers a link between the output from the Omico sequencing back to MPCCC. And so essentially when the clinician makes that referral, then that patient automatically becomes an MPCCC Precision Oncology Program patient. And again, the case is allocated to a fellow across the fellows network and a supervising molecular pathologist as well as a supervising molecular oncologist, and essentially worked up for formal presentation. So that's how the referrals work. The next step, of course, then is to work up those cases, and that's a process that usually occurs over a period of at least a couple of weeks, wherein individually referred cases and the sequencing results are carefully considered by that group, and their cases essentially developed into formal molecular tumour board presentations. And then at the moment, every fortnight, although with a number of cases, we're probably going to be moving to a weekly meeting. Those cases, it's usually somewhere between 5 and 10 cases, are discussed by the relevant fellow. The basic clinical information, the essence of the sequencing findings, and then usually fairly extensive discussion about the implications of those sequencing findings for that particular patient's cancer. And then, of course, the last part of the molecular tumour board discussion is, are there any therapies available, either via compassionate access programs or ideally via clinical trials? And remember, all of the participating sites and indeed the fellows in their spare time, so to speak, actually have direct responsibilities in those hospitals for recruiting patients to clinical trials. So they're actually very, very keenly aware of the trials at their own sites as well as across the wider network. So then there's essentially a recommendation as to what therapies, ideally via clinical trials, are relevant to that particular patient's case history, particularly with reference to the molecular features that have been found associated with their cancer. So that's the description of the overall process. So the actual numbers in terms of the outputs and has anyone actually benefited? So the number of referrals now is, well over 1,000.
Wow.
And most of this, the vast majority of the activity has really just been in the last few years when the fellow program has been activated. So there were a few referrals before that, but most of the work has been done in the relatively recent period. Really pleasingly, we've had a huge jump in the number of referrals coming from our regional partners. So although there are no regional hospitals that are part of the core MPCCC network and they don't have fellows yet, although we're working towards addressing that, all of the regional partners still have strong connections clinically, and they're very warmly welcomed and invited into the MPCCC network. And so one of the really pleasing things about the patterns of referrals is the massive jump in referrals that we've had from regional partners, particularly from the Gippsland region, which, traditionally has really struggled with the sort of delivery of cancer care on sort of several fronts, particularly from lack of sort of investment. So it's been really pleasing to see changes in the kind of culture of cancer down there, and the clinicians in Latrobe are doing a fantastic job, I've got to say, and really warmly have engaged this particular network, and that's evidenced in the large numbers of referrals that have come from down that area. So over the period of time, there's over 50 molecular tumour boards have been conducted. Remember, these data are actually about 9 months out of date now. So this only refers to the data up to about the middle of last year when it was last collated. So it'll be much, much more than that now. So hundreds and hundreds of cases discussed, hundreds and hundreds of genetic changes discussed. But the really impressive outcome, I think, is that 20% of the patients that have been referred into our program, so that's, we're talking like 200 patients or something, there have been recommendations made of molecularly targeted or sometimes other therapies that have been specifically matched to the molecular profile of their cancers in a manner that wouldn't have otherwise been detected. We wouldn't have even known that these therapies were relevant to these patients, but for this precision oncology process that we've undertaken for these individual patients.
That's an incredible success rate.
And I think, and for me as a kind of career researcher and clinical trialist, it's super impressive that 5% of patients, so that's a quarter of all the recommendations, have been to clinical trials.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as you say, in quite diverse locations as well.
Correct, exactly. And we've had, there's, numerous amazing case stories of patients. In fact, I just saw a patient yesterday in my clinic. I involved in running a regional outreach service down in this very southern sort of Victorian Gippsland area. And I actually saw one of my patients yesterday who lives, she lives about 3.5 hours away from Melbourne. And then she traveled about an hour to come to see me in my clinic down there. This lady was in big trouble. She had essentially progressive metastatic cholangiocarcinoma. It's a relatively uncommon type of cancer, but it's sort of notoriously difficult to treat, particularly once it recurs after initial treatment. But because we referred her into this program, because through the molecular tumour board that her case was presented at, a clinical trial was identified that was suitable for her cancer's mutational profile, because she decided to participate in that clinical trial and had a complete response to treatment. She's currently alive and well and disease-free, and she stopped treatment 18 months ago.
Wow.
So it's a remarkable story. And, this is a lady who's living, so she has a dependent partner. She does, a lot of the hoofing and heavy lifting to keep the home and family together. But for this program and but for the referral and but for the clinical trial, she wouldn't be with us anymore. So I think it's a really great outcome. And in fact, but for the sort of networked and regional engagement aspect of it, she wouldn't have even known about the existence of the molecular sequencing, let alone the types of therapies that can be offered as a result of it.
Must give you a great sense of satisfaction, particularly someone so senior now, that you can still meet patients like that in the clinic and share in the joy of the success of this program. So how do people get involved? So clinicians listening, how do they get involved in the molecular tumour boards and with the MPCCC's mission? in general?
The MPCCC's Precision Oncology program is primarily a resource for clinicians. Although, it's certainly possible, indeed, some would argue preferable, for patients to be advocates into their own treating clinicians to get their cases discussed at this particular program. So I'd always encourage, patients to sort of take the lead and to pressure their own clinicians into making appropriate referrals where that's indicated. But primarily the link is with the referring clinician into the MPCCC program. The referrals are easy from the participating sites, such as my hospital and other hospitals under the Monash Uni umbrella in Victoria, because we have our own embedded MPCCC fellows. So the way that I access the program is just to call up my fellow and say, could you please sort out this case for me? But for clinicians outside of the network, it's actually pretty simple. Really, it's just a matter of making a referral. I think the simplest way to do it is to actually refer patients into into Omico's CASP sequencing program. And most oncologists, if not all across the country, should be familiar with that by now. There's a website which is very sort of user-friendly.
We can include all the links in the show notes so people can just click.
So people can just sort of log in via the Omico website. At the end of the first page of the Omico referral form online, it said, would you like to assign a delegate to complete the referral on your behalf? So if you click yes on that button, then some little boxes open up for you to enter additional information in. And if people enter in the following names, so Lama, Lama, Karoum, Karroum, as well as the email address of MPCCC, which is mpccc-caspreferrals@monash.edu, and then obviously fill in the rest of the form, upload the pathology report, all the stuff that we're all familiar with doing, then that basically triggers that very simple, 30 seconds of text entry essentially triggers this substantial behind-the-scenes process where the Omico group get connected with the MPCCC group and ultimately link the outputs of the sequencing with our fellows, who then ultimately, via the molecular tumour boards, will provide direct feedback and recommendations to those referring clinicians. The turnaround it's a little bit slow, not on MPCCC's behalf. We can turn around things very quickly, but still the Omico sequencing can take up to about 8 weeks or so. So mostly I recommend that people refer early. I mean, we all sort of know the patients that are probably likely to develop disease progression even after they start standard primary treatment. That's the time that I typically refer patients into the CASP program or do my own sequencing here at the Alfred Hospital, because you want to get those results coming back as soon as possible and start to line up treatment options that you'll have ready to roll if and once patients become resistant to the treatment that they're on. That's actually the easiest way to do the referral, because you actually refer for sequencing, but at the same time you actually refer into the MPCCC's program to get this much more high-end interpretation of the results that will really, in a more meaningful manner, help you inform treatment options for the patient. Of course, the other way to do it is just to actually email directly to the same address and the same person. And you can even send in or submit a patient's sequencing results that you might have already got from some other source, and just request for that case to be processed through the MPCCC Precision Oncology program. And then actually pretty quickly, the outputs of that program will then be fed back to that referring clinician. So it's actually pretty easy. It's just a simple email. I mean, additionally, I'm happy to be contacted myself, and I can also facilitate and make those connections for my clinical colleagues.
That's very generous of you now. We touched on equity before, so I'm just going to share for the listeners what the MPCCC's tagline is, which is advancing cancer care for all Victorians. Now, magic wand time. If you could change one thing about the way that cancer care was delivered in Victoria, what would it be?
It would be breaking down silos of cancer care delivery. So I think that the fundamental, and this is it's actually directly my own experience. So I've been involved in delivering cancer care directly in a regional centre, and it's sort of obvious to me, or has been obvious to me, in the way we've developed that service and my experiences in going down in the early days, that, there's some great people down there, but they hadn't had the opportunity to be exposed to clinical environments where that sort of deliver care, particularly cancer care, according to many of our modern paradigms. But the fact that me, and not only me, there's other people from my team that also go down, have been able to actually go down and work with the people locally, with the staff locally, nursing staff, allied health staff, other physicians at those hospitals, to work directly with them. So essentially kind of get rid of the barriers and the silos between sort of my health service and theirs by literally physically engaging across the physical divide between us. That's improved the general standards of care, and particularly the access of patients and doctors down there to some of our modern approaches to cancer. So I think strategies to break down the silos that exist across the collective healthcare systems would be the number one thing that I would focus on to improve equity of access to care.
Because, of course, it's election season, so we think about value for taxpayers. And, this idea that a taxpayer in regional Victoria has not the same access to treatment and clinical trials as someone who's living in a metropolitan area.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a moral issue, yeah? So, I mean, someone living, obviously I'm just speaking for Victoria, but it applies right across the country. But, someone who lives 3 hours from Melbourne who pays the same taxes that I do, like, why shouldn't they have access to the same level of public healthcare that I do living in Melbourne? Modern communication technologies certainly help, but I also really believe that, to some degree, there's also no substitute still for some level of physical interaction. And I personally think that, I feel really privileged to be able to work in public healthcare. And I think that part of that privilege is that I should be required to figure out how to break down those silos as one of my reporting metrics. Why not? Why shouldn't I, as a sort of inner city, metro, ivory tower type of public hospital clinician, I think it's a very reasonable expectation of me that I should be part of the solution, required to be part of the solution of breaking down those silos that I alluded to. And that includes, taking responsibility for some regional areas and for making sure that I'm working with local healthcare deliverers to essentially maximize the access that those patients deserve.
It's very inspiring. Thank you. Now, just before we go, how do listeners find out more? Do you have a newsletter?
Yeah, we certainly do. MPCCC has a newsletter, in fact, and it goes out every month. And the same email address that I alluded to before can actually be used, I think, for people to jump onto the mailing list and to receive ongoing and updated information about MPCCC's activities.
Excellent. We'll include the email address in the show notes, of course, and the website address, which I'll just quickly mention in case people are not in front of the computer, is mpccc.org.au. So that's where to go to find out more information about this incredible network. So thank you, Mark. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Rachael. And thank you so much for having a program focused on equity. So it's obviously kind of hot and topical, but, at some really fundamental level, it's super important. And so, thanks very much for your contribution to helping us to deliver that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Oncology Podcast Experts on Point series, brought to you by the Oncology Network. To find links and materials mentioned in this episode, including key steps for patient referrals to the MPCCC's Precision Oncology Program, visit oncologynews.com.au. If you found today's discussion valuable, please share this episode with your colleagues and networks. And don't forget to subscribe to the MPCCC's newsletter for more expert insights on precision oncology and cancer care. Visit mpccc.org.au/news. This is Rachael Babin, and thank you for tuning in to the Oncology Podcast.